Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put the font weight. If you wanted to look at this one more time, and you could see that font weight would in fact come before font size. Okay, so that's a good thing to know. All right, so we're going to say font is 400, and then the next thing is going to be the weight. We haven't, or excuse me, the size. We haven't specified the size yet. And so what I want to do is I want to specify that it's going to be 1.3 em. I want it to be sort of nice and bold. And then for the line height, I want to give it plenty of space for room in between the lines, and we'll do 1.6. Now you don't say 1.6 em. It understands that it's this relationship is the same unit of measure as this is. Okay, so we're going to say 1.3 em and then 1.6 for the line height. And then what we can do is we can come up here and we can copy the rest of this font family and we'll paste it next. Now we want Railway to be the first choice, but I don't want it to just default to sans serif if Railway is not available. There's still some other options that I could choose. And so what I want to choose then is first Helvetica, okay, because Helvetica comes on Macintosh computers, which is kind of nice. So even though it doesn't come on Windows by default, you know, maybe it'll load first. And then I would want to say something like Arial, and then comma sans serif. Okay, so those will be my different fallback choices after Railway. All right, and so if I wanted to just comment this out and get rid of this real quickly, I'll do Control-3 and we'll test it. Let's go back up here to Chrome. Oh, and it's asking me to save it, so yes, we'll save it. And we're going to remember this. One of the things about this is I'm trying to test a CSS file. So it's saying, do you want to preview using a different file? Yes, I do. I want to preview it using this file right here, the index file, okay? And then I can say remember this selection, okay? And then that way it'll remember it. Okay, so now my font looks a little bit better. It's not like tiny and, you know, jammed up next to itself. Okay, so we're getting there, all right? So that's how you can deal with the font stuff, all right? And let's also, since we know that that's looking okay, let's go ahead and we can get rid of that. Now, we can also look at the font size here real quick, where it says 100%, and you might be wondering, well, wait, isn't this the font size? Yes, but the thing is that I want to go ahead and start at 100%, and then from that, we can move into this, and then it will definitely, 1.3 will be basically 130% of 100%. I know it might sound a little confusing, but that's just the way it works. Okay, so now I can go ahead and move down from the body, and the next thing that I want to do is go ahead and start thinking about my navigational area. So here's the way it currently looks right now, and here's kind of how I want it to look, right? So what I can do is look at this dark area, this whole bar up at the top, and say, all right, well, that's my nav. So first thing I need to do is realize that I need to set it because it has a float in it, float left and a float right. This whole thing here is floating right. And so because I know that those things are floating, there's a trick that you always have to tell the parent of floats. You have to tell it to be overflow hidden, otherwise your floats aren't going to show up right. So before we do anything, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tell it to take this top nav, and I'm going to go ahead and just paste this in here so you don't have to watch me type it. And I'm going to make a rule that is called nav pound or hash top. And the reason I write the rule like that is because what I'm doing is I'm saying the instance of nav whose ID is top, okay? And that's without a space inside of it, in between these two. That means that top ID is assigned to nav, as opposed to top being inside of the nav, okay? So anyway, what we're gonna do is first thing, we're gonna say overflow hidden. And I'm going to do this because I know that it's going to have floats inside of it, and I know that it's going to mess my floats up if I don't do this. So I'm going to go ahead and say overflow hidden. The next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and set a background color, and then that way I can see the area that it's actually, you know, occupying. And I'm going to use the color of 333, which is a sort of a charcoal gray. It's a very dark gray. And let's just go ahead and save that for right now. And if you wanted to test you can test it constantly as you're going through, and you see now it's got my navigational area as gray. So immediately I can also see that the links are going to have to be restyled, no problem. But at least this starts to give me an idea of which area is actually the nav area. Okay, let me close a bunch of this stuff so that it's not confusing later. All right, that's our original one. Now that we have that, let's move on and let's get those things floating, the H1 and the UL next to each other. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type nav top, and then we're going to say H1 so that I know that it's the H1 inside of nav top. And we're going to tell it to float left. Okay, then the next thing I want to do is go ahead and come down here and make a rule. Because I'm going to be doing something for the unordered list down here, I'm going to actually create something that is specific to the navigation. So I'm going to write this comment here, and I'm going to say nav top, and we're going to say UL, because it's going to be this unordered list here, and we want to float the entire list, not just the list items. We'll deal with the list items in a minute, but we want to put the whole list over, so we're going to say float right. Save that. And by floating this right as opposed to floating left, it's going to actually cinch to the right side instead of trying to cinch to the right side of this item. So it'll try to go to the other side of the browser, which is good. And then the other thing that we can do is we can go ahead and set a width. So let's just say that we want the width for the H1 to maybe be 10% for right now. And oops, let's do a percent sign. Okay, and we want the percentage of the width for the UL maybe to be 90%. We want it to have more space. So let's just start with that. Let's save that and see what kinds of crazy things it does in the browser window now. Okay, and what's happening is that you can't really see it very well because next thing I need to fix probably are my colors, but at least it's actually doing what I asked it to do. So if I hit inspect element and I were to hover over the entire UL, see how it's blue up there? Because I'm hovering over the entire list, it is 90% and this is 10%. So it's doing what I want, but the problem is that these list items aren't floating, so it doesn't look like it's doing what I want. But if you look at the inspector, you know, it'll work like that. So you can actually see that so far it looks correct. Okay, so let's actually fix the H1 up and the colors and stuff so that we can see stuff better. Before I go much further, I'm also going to create a comment for my logo because I want to make sure that my logo is really clearly delineated. And I can't just tell this to have a certain color because if you remember, this H1 has an anchor inside of it. So even if I tell the H1 to be a certain color, the anchor is going to be a totally different color because remember, anchor links, they don't inherit color and they don't inherit text decoration, things like that. So what we need to do is, I'm just going to copy this up here and paste it right here. And I'm going to say any A that's inside of an H1 inside of the top nav is going to get the following rules. And so those rules are going to be, let's say color first of all, and that's going to be the color of the text. For right now, let's make it, I don't know, let's make it white, and we'll change that later. And then we also want to definitely say text decoration is none. Okay, so first things first, we can do that. The other thing too that we can do is we can tell it to go ahead and be 100% height, because if you look, I want to show you something. If you look at the way the original one is, see how that takes up the entire space, and whenever I hover over it, that A is filling up like a balloon. It's just filling up the entire block. There's no margin or padding or anything like that. And so I need this A almost to be like a balloon inside of the H1 container. So like you blow the balloon up and it just fills it up all the way. So I need to take care of that so that the whole thing becomes a clickable link the way that I want it to be. Okay, and so once again, I'm not going to make you watch me type. I'm just going to paste some stuff and I'll explain it. So A is technically, it's normally an inline element where it sits side by side things, and it doesn't take margins and padding the same way as blocks do. And so I want to turn the A into a block level element. So I want to say display block. And the reason is because I want it to be that balloon. So it needs to be like a block to do that. I'm going to give it padding. So the first value is the top and bottom. The second value is going to be left and right. And we can play around with that, but that's where I think I want to give it a start. And the background color for the anchor link is going to be this sort of pale color. And the height, I want it to be 100% of the height. It's inside of the H1, so let's give the H1 a specific height as well. And let's just say that the H1 is going to be, I don't know, let's say 2.3 m. I think that that's probably going to be about right. Okay, and then also we can tell it, right now what we have is we have a width up here. Let's get rid of this actually. We have a width of 10%, but you know, there might be occasions where I don't really want it to take up an entire 10% of the screen. So if you look at the example right here, you know, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, but it maxes out at a certain size when it stops getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If you look, see, it maxes out, it just stopped getting too big. It maxes out at like 3M, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell it width is 10%, but I'm gonna say max width is 3M. And the way that this works is that it'll keep being 10%, so it'll keep expanding, expanding, or shrinking, shrinking. But when it's expanding, this rule will kick in since it comes after this rule, and it'll say, okay, well, the maximum width is 3M, and it'll stop at 3M. So it'll keep expanding 10% up until it hits 3M. So let's save that, and let's see how we look so far. Okay, at least now it's starting to look a little bit more normal, right? So that is where it's stopping at its 3M mark, okay? So I'm gonna close this up, and we can come back. And the other thing too, I wanna tell this, inside of the H1, I wanna type text align, and I wanna say center, okay? Because I want it to be centered, I don't want it to be left justified. The way that it was left justified, and so now at least this thing is in the center, okay? All right, so far we've got that. Now we need to deal with these list items here. Okay, so to do that, we need to come under the section where we're talking about the UL, and we need to go ahead and create some stuff for the list items. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just going to paste that in, and what this is saying again is any instance of an LI or a list item, okay, which would correspond to this or this or whatever inside of a UL, okay, which is here, that's inside of the nav top, okay? So we're going to target those. First thing we want to do is we want to put the float to it. So we're going to have them float right so that they go to the right side and not the left side of the container. And then the next thing that I want to also do is I want to go ahead and tell it to have a width and a height too. So if you think about it, we have 5 links that are in this list. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 100% divided by 5 is 20%. And of course, that when I say 100%, you might look at this and go, wait a second, you're saying it's 90%. Well, the list items are going to be able to take up 100% of its parent, which would be the unordered list. The unordered list happens to be 90% of its parent, okay? So it automatically will inherit the sizes and it'll scale down appropriately. So we're going to say that the width for each one of these is 20%, and let's just go ahead and say for right now that the height is 100%. Let's just hit save, and we're going to do a quick test. Okay, and you see now at least you can't really see the links all that well, you know, because they're blue, but at least they're floating properly. Let's fix the way that they look because they're pretty ugly. Okay,